June 19, 1944, 10:36 a.m. Philippine Sea, 90 miles west of Guam. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer, leading Fighting Squadron 15 from USS Essex, sees them first. A formation of roughly 50 Japanese aircraft at 18,000 feet. Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters escorting Nakajima B6N torpedo bombers, holding tight formation on a direct line toward the American fleet. Above and behind them, Brewer's F-6F Hellcats sit at 25,000 feet with altitude and sun advantage. 15 more American fighters wait, positioned to follow his call. This is the interception American pilots have trained for. Brewer checks fuel, ammunition, wingmen, everything is aligned. He keys the radio. Tallyho. Zeros and torpedo bombers. Angels 18, let's go get 'em. 16 Hellcats roll into steep dives. In seconds, the closure speed climbs past 600 miles per hour. The Japanese formation, focused on navigation and timing, doesn't see them until the first bursts of American .50 caliber fire tear into the group. Over the next 8 hours, this will become known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Aerial combat so one-sided it enters naval history as a byword for annihilation. By day's end, more than 600 Japanese aircraft will be destroyed for fewer than 30 American losses. Japan's carrier air arm, rebuilt after Midway and the Solomons, will be effectively broken. But at 10:36 a.m., none of that is guaranteed. The Japanese are attacking in multiple waves from 9 carrier air groups, more than 400 aircraft. If even a fraction break through and hit the carriers with bombs and torpedoes, the entire Marianas invasion could be thrown into crisis. American pilots must stop them, all of them. Brewer closes to 400 yards behind a zero. He centers the target in his gun sight and squeezes the trigger. 6 machine guns fire together. The zero erupts into a bright fireball. Brewer banks hard toward the next aircraft. Around him, the Japanese formation is already breaking apart. Confusion spreads through the sky. The slaughter has begun. By June 1944, the Pacific War had reached a decisive phase. American forces advanced along 2 axes. MacArthur moved through New Guinea toward the Philippines. Nimitz drove across the central Pacific through the Gilberts and Marshalls. Ahead lay Japan's in a defensive perimeter. The Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam formed its cornerstone. Their importance was immense. Capture would put American forces within roughly 1,500 miles of Tokyo, inside the operational range of the new B-29 Superfortress bombers. The Marianas would provide airfields, anchorages, and staging bases for operations against the Philippines and ultimately Japan itself. For Japan, losing them meant exposing the home islands to direct bombing and weakening supply routes to the southern territories. American planners expected the Japanese to fight with everything they had. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the 5th Fleet, prepared not only for the invasion of Saipan, but for a major fleet battle. Task Force 58, under Vice Admiral Mark Mitscher, assembled an unprecedented carrier force. 15 fleet and light carriers, 7 battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and over 900 aircraft. Japan responded with Operation Ago. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa led the Mobile Fleet. 9 carriers with roughly 450 aircraft, 5 battleships including Yamato and Musashi, and supporting cruisers and destroyers. The plan depended on several assumptions. Land-based aircraft from the Marianas and Carolines would add strength, creating numerical superiority. Japanese planes had longer range, allowing strikes from beyond American reach. Pilots could hit the American fleet, then land in the Marianas to refuel and rearm before returning to their carriers. On paper, it looked elegant. In reality, it rested on a failing foundation. Japanese land-based air power in the Marianas had been heavily reduced by American carrier raids in the weeks before the invasion. Worse, Japanese pilot quality had collapsed since 1942. Veteran aviators lost at Midway, in the Solomons, and in New Guinea had been replaced by hurriedly trained pilots averaging under 100 flight hours. American pilots, by contrast, were better trained, more experienced, and flying rugged aircraft designed to maximize survival and firepower. The battle ahead would reveal the difference. Spruance, 57, was cautious by nature. His priority was clear: protect the invasion force, not chase a decisive fleet engagement at any cost. Mitscher, also 57 and an aviator, was more aggressive. He understood carrier warfare intimately and believed in seizing range and initiative. Ozawa, 58, was capable and determined, but faced an air arm that could no longer match its opponent. Among the American aviators, Commander David McCampbell, leading Air Group 15 aboard Essex, would shoot down 7 aircraft on June 19th and become the Navy's leading ace. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alexander Vrasiu, flying from USS Lexington, would destroy 6 aircraft in 8 minutes during a single interception. Their performances would be famous, but they were also a product of a wider system: training, tactics, aircraft, and radar control. On the Japanese side, Warrant Officer Zenji Abe represented a shrinking minority. One of the few remaining experienced pilots from the early war, he would lead strikes knowing many of the men around him were not ready for what they were about to face. American forces landed on Saipan on June 15th. The invasion triggered the expected Japanese response. Ozawa's mobile fleet sailed east from the Philippines toward the Marianas. American submarines detected them on June 17th. USS Flying Fish reported contact as the fleet moved through the Philippine Sea. USS Seahorse confirmed and tracked course and speed. By June 18th, Spruance knew a major battle was coming, and roughly when. Spruance now faced a decision that would define the engagement. Japanese carrier aircraft could strike from beyond 300 miles. If he steamed west to close range aggressively, he would move away from Saipan, risking a Japanese maneuver that could threaten the invasion transports. If he stayed close, he would fight defensively, relying on early detection and fighter interception. Spruance chose defense. Task Force 58 would position west of Saipan, between Ozawa and the beaches. Fighters would intercept incoming strikes. Submarines would attack the carrier force. Mitscher's carriers would strike when the Japanese came within range. Mitscher recommended pushing west at night to close distance and attack at dawn. Spruance refused. The risk to Saipan was too high. Mitscher complied, convinced an opportunity was slipping away. Through the night, the American carrier groups held position. Radar watch was constant. Fighters were kept ready. Aircraft stood armed and fueled on flight decks. Pilots slept where they could, close to their planes, waiting for first light. Ozawa approached from the west, planning to launch at maximum range. His aircraft would attack the American fleet, then continue to Marianas airfields to refuel and rearm. It was a plan built on reach, but many of those airfields were no longer safe, usable, or even available. At 5:30 a.m. on June 19th, Ozawa launched the first strike. 69 aircraft from Taihō, Shōkaku, and Shōkaku. Fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers formed up and flew east toward the last reported American position. At 10 o'clock a.m., American radar detected the raid while it was still far out, roughly 150 miles away. That warning time was decisive. Fighter direction officers could see the incoming formation and American fighters on radar screens at the same time, then vector interceptors into ideal positions, above, behind, and often with the sun at their backs. Japanese pilots had no comparable warning. Many would not see the Hellcats until tracers cut through their formations. At 10:23 a.m., the first interceptions began about 70 miles from Task Force 58. Hellcats dove from high altitude and struck the Japanese formations head-on and from above. The combat was brutal and uneven. American fighters were faster, better armored, more heavily armed, and flown by pilots trained in energy tactics. Japanese formations included many pilots with minimal combat experience. Vracio intercepted a group of dive bombers. In 8 minutes, he shot down 6 in succession, moving from target to target with short bursts. His wingman destroyed 2 more. The formation disintegrated before it could reach the fleet. Across multiple intercepts, the pattern repeated. Japanese groups, already reduced, ran into successive fighter screens. Few aircraft even reached visual range of the ships. Those that did were met by dense anti-aircraft fire from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Of the 69 aircraft in the first strike, roughly 42 were shot down. Most of the survivors were damaged beyond recovery, crashing on attempted landings or ditching at sea. Perhaps 5 returned to their carriers. American losses in that engagement were effectively 0. Ozawa, still unaware of the scale of destruction, continued launching. The second strike, 128 aircraft, departed around 9 o'clock a.m. from Juneau, Taihō, and Ryuho. The third strike, 47 aircraft, followed around 10 o'clock a.m. They met the same wall. Radar detected them early. Fighter directors vectored interceptors. Hellcats hit from altitude. The losses became catastrophic. The second strike lost roughly 100 aircraft. A few planes reached the fleet and scored minor hits on USS South Dakota and USS Bunker Hill. Both remained operational. McCampbell, leading fighters from Essex, personally shot down 7 aircraft during interceptions of the second wave. His assessment afterward was blunt. The enemy pilots showed poor tactical awareness. Many did not react until they were already under fire. The third strike was virtually annihilated. Over 40 of 47 aircraft were destroyed. By early afternoon, Japanese carrier air groups were no longer functioning as effective combat units. Of roughly 240 aircraft launched in the first 3 strikes, fewer than 30 returned. And as Japanese aircraft were being destroyed overhead, American submarines were closing on the carriers themselves. USS Albacore, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, maneuvered into attack position on Ozawa's flagship Taihō. At 9:10 a.m., Blanchard fired 6 torpedoes. 1 hit on the starboard side near aviation fuel storage. At first, damage appeared manageable. Taihō maintained speed and continued operations, but gasoline vapors spread through compartments. Then came a fatal decision. Ventilation was increased in an attempt to clear fumes. Instead, vapor was distributed throughout the ship. At 3:32 p.m., a spark ignited the mixture. Taihō exploded. The blast buckled the armored flight deck, ruptured the hull, and triggered uncontrollable fires. Within 2 hours, Taihō capsized and sank. Ozawa survived and transferred his flag to cruiser Haguro. USS Cavalier struck next. At 12:20 p.m., Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler attacked Shōkaku, scoring 3 torpedo hits on the starboard side. Shōkaku, a veteran carrier, burned as fires reached fuel and ordnance storage. At 3 o'clock p.m., she exploded and sank. In a single day, Japan had lost 2 fleet carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and irreplaceable aircrews. Yet Ozawa still launched a 4th strike. In mid-afternoon, 82 aircraft took off from the remaining carriers. They too were detected, intercepted, and cut down. Roughly 65 of 82 were destroyed. By evening, Japanese carrier aviation had effectively ceased to exist. Of the roughly 450 aircraft available at the start, fewer than 50 remained flyable. Pilot losses were devastating. Many squadron leaders and experienced aircrew were gone. Survivors were scattered, exhausted, and shaken. American losses for June 19th were remarkably low. 29 aircraft destroyed in combat, most pilots rescued. The loss ratio was unprecedented. As darkness fell, Mitscher prepared for a strike the next day. But the Japanese fleet was retreating westward. The distance was extreme. Any attack would push into the edge of American range and force a night return. On June 20th, the Japanese fleet was located in late afternoon, about 275 miles away. It was at the limit of American aircraft endurance. Launching meant attacking late, then returning in darkness with minimal fuel. Many aircraft would not make it back. Pilots would have to ditch or attempt hazardous night landings. Mitscher launched anyway. At 4:20 p.m., 216 aircraft took off from 11 carriers and flew west into the setting sun. At 6:40 p.m., they found the Japanese fleet and attacked under heavy fire. Taihō was hit and later sank. Other carriers, including Shōkaku and Chiyoda, were damaged. The strike inflicted damage, but the return became a test of survival. Fuel gauges fell toward empty. Aircraft reached the fleet area, unable to find their carriers in darkness. Pilots circled, burning the last gallons, searching for a deck. Mitscher made a decision that saved lives. He ordered ships to turn on their lights. Searchlights pointed upward, deck lights illuminated, even vehicle lights appeared on carrier decks. It violated blackout rules and risked exposing the fleet, but it gave pilots navigation beacons. Aircraft landed on any carrier with space. Some crashed in exhausted approaches. Others ditched near ships and were pulled from the sea by destroyers. By midnight, recovery was complete. Of the 216 launched, 80 aircraft were lost, mostly to fuel exhaustion, but many crews were rescued. The battle was decided. Japanese losses were catastrophic. 3 carriers sunk, over 600 aircraft destroyed, and thousands of personnel lost, including most carrier-qualified pilots. Though Japan still had ships afloat, the carrier force had been hollowed out. Without trained aircrew, carriers were no longer decisive weapons. American losses were comparatively light. Minor ship damage, aircraft losses largely tied to fuel and darkness, and limited personnel casualties. Task Force 58 remained operational. The invasion of the Marianas continued without serious naval interference. Saipan fell on July 9th, Tinian on August 1st, Guam on August 10th. Airfields for B-29s were constructed. By November, bombers were striking Tokyo from the Marianas. The long-term impact was decisive. Japan's naval aviation could not recover. The battle validated American strengths, training, aircraft design, radar-directed fighter control, and logistical reach. It also illustrated a reality Japan could not escape. Skill alone could not compensate for shrinking experience, shortened training, and declining industrial capacity. For American pilots, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot became legend, but those who flew it understood the truth. It wasn't just courage. It was an entire system that created advantage in altitude, detection, direction, and endurance. For Japanese survivors, it was a different lesson. Conventional carrier strikes had failed catastrophically. The idea that suicide attacks might be the only way to inflict meaningful damage gained momentum. If the enemy could not be beaten in the air, perhaps he could be bled at the cost of the attacker's life. Strategically, the result was clear. Control of the Central Pacific had shifted beyond dispute. The road to Tokyo was open. The question was no longer whether Japan would be defeated, but how long it would take.